Okay, good evening. We're ready to go. I'm going to start in just a few seconds here. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the second talk in a series I'm doing on Vipassana. And specifically, I'm basing it on the work of Mahāsi Sayādaw, in specific the book Progress of Insight, which I've put in the comments. I've put a pinned comment with a link to the online version. And just to very briefly recap what I went over yesterday, this is a work based on the stages of purification that has been expanded in the commentarial tradition from the 7 purifications to the 21 stages of insight. Mahāsi Sayādaw was a leading Vipassana teacher in Burma, and his work, he wrote extensively. There's many books that he's written. Many of them are hard to find in English, but the Progress of Insight is one that's readily accessible. His work is very scholarly, and he's got a very strong grounding in the Abhidhamma and the commentarial tradition, especially the Visuddhimagga. You'll find references throughout his work to those sources. And what I want to deal with today is the first two purifications, the purification of conduct and the purification of mind. And the purification of conduct is the purification of sila or ethics, and it's treated very briefly by Mahāsi in this book, assuming that the reader knows already the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, the 10 precepts, and which he mentions. Now, the 5 precepts are the basic morality for all Buddhists. Not to refrain. The precepts are phrased in a particular way. Panatipata veramani sikapadang samadayami. I shall endeavor to train myself to refrain from the taking of life. That's the first precept, no killing. So it's seen as a training. I shall endeavor to train myself to refrain from. So this is an important nuance. It's not like a commandment. It's not thou shalt not kill. It's a affirmation you make that I shall endeavor to train myself in this, to walk in this way, to practice in this way of not harming or killing sentient beings. And then the second one is adina dana, where money I shall refrain from taking that which is not given, that is theft. Third one is Kamisu Michichara Veramani, I shall refrain from sexual misconduct, that is adultery. And Musawada Veramani, I shall refrain from false speech, and that's extended to include the other forms of wrong speech, which are slander, harsh speech, and foolish babbling. And the final one is to refrain from the taking of intoxicants. So those are the basic moral ethics. Then there's expanded versions that include renunciant ethics, the 8 precepts, which add not eating in the afternoon, and sexual misconduct is changed to sexual activity, so it's celibacy, and not using perfumes and bodily adornments, or going to shows and entertainments, and not sleeping or sitting in luxurious chairs and beds. So these additional precepts are considered renunciant precepts. They're an aid to sense restraint. This is an important distinction. The 8 precepts, the additional precepts, are not moral or ethical precepts. They're renunciant precepts as an aid to sense restraint. There's nothing immoral about eating in the afternoon, but if you refrain from eating in the afternoon, you're cutting off one avenue of diversion through the senses. So keeping the 8 precepts on a meditation retreat is a very beneficial practice. And in Buddhist countries, lay people will often take as a practice, they'll take the 8 precepts for a period of time, sometimes just for a single day. If that's done, the traditional way of doing it is from sundown to sundown. The 10 precepts, really only adds one additional precept. The 7th precept in the list of 8 is divided into 2. It's just rephrased, and the additional precept is not handling money. And these 10 precepts are the ones that are taken by a novice monk, a samanera. And then for bhikkhus, there's 227 patimokkha precepts. So ethics, or sila, keeping the precepts, is the foundation of practice. If your sila is not good, your practice will not progress. You won't succeed. The mind will be filled with regret and remorse, and it will be very difficult to maintain a purity of mind when you don't have purity of conduct. So that's the first purification of conduct. And then the next one is purification of mind. And in the Progress of Insight, Mahāsi's book, this is a relatively extensive section. And the way he approaches it, and you have to understand that this is the original source of this in the sutta, this Relay Coach Sutta. These purifications are not described. It's a very concise, just a list of names. So they're open to interpretation. And Mahāsi's way of describing purification of mind is to get into some details and description of his meditation practice, the particular practice. And in this particular book, this is a relatively brief and incomplete description of his practice. There, another of his works, initial, or I think it's called Beginning and Progressive Stages. It deals with the details of practice in much more detail, if anyone wants to study that. So I'll talk about, this is going to be the main theme of today's talk. I'm going to talk about the method, the method of insight meditation or Vipassana as taught by the Mahāsi Sayādaw school. This is called a bare insight practice. This is a term that Mahāsi uses because it doesn't require the student to begin with prior work on the jhanas. I would say, in my experience and my opinion and observing others, that it's very beneficial to do samatha meditation prior to taking up serious work on Vipassana. The absolutely bare Vipassana path may work for some individuals, and probably eventually it will work for many more, but it's difficult. Now, if the mind is untrained and kind of raw, wild, and you jump right into Vipassana, it's going to be painful and difficult. It'll be much easier if you've calmed and toned the mind first with the practice of samatha. But be that as it may, we'll talk about the Vipassana method here. The basic object that is used for the practice in Mahāsi tradition is the movement of the breath at the belly or the abdomen, the sensation of the bowl of the abdomen rising and falling. And this is taken as an object precisely because, and Mahāsi, not in this book, but elsewhere, I've seen he was explicit about this. It's chosen as an object because it's so broad and relatively complex as compared to, say, the movement of the breath at the nose, that it precludes going into jhana. You won't develop samadhi to that depth because the object is too diffuse. And this is intended because if you're in jhana, you can't do Vipassana while you're in jhana. So you do not want to get too deeply stabilized, too unified. You want the mind to be able to do some investigation. Also, this object it serves as a very suitable vehicle for insight, in that one becomes aware of the sense of motion, and this leads to the perception of impermanence and the perception of imperfection, of dukkha. That this becomes evident in the bodily process. So it's a very suitable object as a base object. And the beginning meditator will be observing that, and once you have some fluidity with the practice, you would not stay with that object for too long. You observe the movement of the breath until you feel calmed and settled, and then you make a subtle shift in the mind and observe other objects. And the whole theory of Vipassana in this tradition is that you are striving to observe the stream of objects that passes through the screen of consciousness without picking and choosing, without discrimination, and without analyzing or judging. You're just trying to settle into a clear awareness of these passing objects. And these objects can be either external objects like a sound or a smell, a sensation elsewhere in the body, a pain or a feeling of heat or cold, etc. Or they can be purely internal, like memories, daydreams, emotional states. And one should treat every object with the same degree of attention. A good rule of thumb is that no object is so trivial that it can be ignored, and no object is so important that it needs to be held. Sometimes people use the phrase letting go, and even that's not quite right, because letting go assumes you've actually held it. You're trying not to hold on to anything, even briefly. You're just letting them pass one by one across the screen of consciousness. Mahāsi, in another of his writings, he uses a metaphor of sitting in your car at a railway crossing, watching a long train go by, and briefly noticing each train car as it passes. So this is like the stream of the stream of objects that's continually passing through our conscious awareness. And a particular method of this tradition is the use of what is called noting, or sometimes it's called labeling. The noting is done by briefly identifying the objects as you become aware of them. So one would note hearing, smelling, feeling pain, remembering, imagining. Now the reason for the noting is it's a skillful means. It's a very useful technique. The purpose of it is to develop a precision in the mind. We're not trying in this practice, we're not trying to develop a kind of fuzzy general awareness. We're trying to develop a sharp, focused, immediate attention to the particular object of consciousness at this moment. This brings us back to the Abhidhamma theory, which Mahāsi is very familiar with and quotes often. The idea in Abhidhamma is that whether you're meditating or not, at each moment of time, consciousness is taking a single discrete object. There's no multitasking as such, no pure division in the mind. So when you're watching this video, you're hearing me talk, your mind is shifting back and forth rapidly between eye consciousness and ear consciousness. You don't actually, in a single mind moment, you don't actually see and hear at the same time. Now that's taking things down to a very, very fine level. And we cannot really hope to approach the level of a single mind moment, but we are trying to approach that as closely as we can and make the mind very quick and precise and clear, and kind of sharp. And there can be an experience, if one's is deep into this practice, there can be an experience of the mind where consciousness is perceived in that kind of staccato manner. It's like a flashing of a strobe light, a rapid flashing of a strobe light. That in each moment there's a single object, and this is what we're striving towards. We're striving towards a precision. And another quality that we should be trying to develop is equanimity, upekkha. That is a non-reactive attention to the objects. And this is where often a difficulty comes in for the meditator, because objects will arise to which we have an emotional response. There's some resonance with old memories, or even with the present physical sensations or what have you, that one will feel either happy or sad or anxious, etc. And with the proper practice of Vipassana, then although these reactions can occur, the meditator should just be aware of them as objects, just aware of feeling sad, feeling happy, and you can always, whatever is happening in the mind, you can always step back into the clear knowing and just note the object. And with time, this develops a detachment from the objects and an equanimity. And it's like you're watching a movie going on, and you're not intrinsically involved in it. You're just very clearly noticing each moment, but without grasping it or getting involved or trying to analyze it or trying to figure it out or what have you. This is the quality of mind, that a particular kind of equanimity that's called in Pali tatra majjhatthata. And I love that word. It's a really neat Pali word. It's translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi in his Abhidhamma book as specific neutrality. And that's a good translation. I don't have any quarrel with it. It's very clear, expressing the meaning of it. But a more literal translation would be the state of being in the middle about that. Tatra is that, and it's an emphatic that. It's like a precise that, not just that thing over there, but that particular thing. And Majja is the middle, and Atta is the state of. So being the state of being in the middle about that. So one's not just generally equanimous, although you should be, but you're equanimous about that, whatever that object is at this moment. You're equanimous about it. And you're able to take in whatever it may be, and just observe it, note it, let it pass. I would also say that in this practice, a very important class of objects to be aware of are intentions. That's a particularly important thing to be aware of. That begins with the physical intention, the intention to move. If you're sitting, and I know some, like in the Goenka tradition, they emphasize you're sitting, you don't move at all. You practice complete stillness for the hour of the meditation, or however long it's set for. But in Mahāsi tradition, they're not strict about not moving, but what they do say is that you should never move without first noticing a sense of discomfort, then noticing the intention to move, and then noticing the motion. So you break it down as far as you can. So let's say you're sitting and you're getting a cramp in your leg, and you know you can relieve that by shifting your leg so the weight's on the other leg. You should never just kind of mindlessly move or thrash. You should first be aware of the physical sensation of discomfort, then notice the intention or the decision arising in the mind, I shall move my leg, and then notice the movement of the leg. So at least 3 discrete events. And as you get sharper with the meditation, you'll be noticing things on a finer and finer grain. Another more subtle physical intention to work on is the intention to swallow. As the mouth periodically fills up with saliva, we swallow. I don't know, probably once a minute or something like that. And it's not completely automatic. There's a little intention involved in that. So you should, if you're really sharp with the meditation, you'd never swallow without first noticing the discomfort of saliva building up, then the intention to swallow, then the physical act of swallowing. And if you get really good at noticing intentions, you can actually notice the intention to think. And this is reaching a stage where the meditation becomes much calmer and easier, more pleasant. As everyone knows who takes up meditation practice, one of the difficulties is the mind jumping around and following thought patterns and so on, and getting lost in daydreams or memories. But if you notice the thought on its first arising, and you're not feeding it any energy. Here's thinking, and you notice thinking, and you let it pass. Just let it pass. You don't follow it or go into it. But you can take it even further. You can prevent the thoughts from arising altogether. Because if you're really quick with the noticing, you'll notice that every thought has an intention behind it. And there's a stage in the mind when there's an intention to think, and the thought does not yet have any content. It's not thinking about anything. It's just a kind of a gelling or a congealing of the mind towards the process of thought. And you can feel that beginning to happen. You make a note of it, and if you notice it clearly, that cuts it off. You're not feeding it anything. So no thought forms. But if you're a beginner, that's getting way ahead of the game. You won't notice that those kind of fine details for some time. But just to give you a sense of where it's going. In the brief introduction in this book, Mahāsi doesn't talk about the walking meditation, but a walking meditation is a big part of the system, and elsewhere is described in detail. When doing walking in the Mahāsi tradition, one should walk very slowly, and also the gait is a little bit unnatural. If you just walk in a natural manner, you'll see that the left foot begins to rise, the heel begins to rise off the floor, while the right foot is still settling. Both feet are in process. But you should try and walk just one foot at a time, and walk very slowly, and notice that you shift now the basic object from the breath to the physical sensation of touch on the soles of the feet. So if possible, it's good to walk barefoot, or at most in socks if it's too cold to walk barefoot. It's good to have that sensation of touch on the soles of the feet. And the walk is noticed in the phases of lifting, moving, and placing. And you walk very slowly, exaggeratedly slowly, and pay attention to the motions of lifting, moving, placing. And if the mind gets busy while you're walking and various objects occur to the mind, then the advice is to stop walking, stand still, and note the objects until the mind calms, and then go back to walking. And in the Mahāsi tradition, you alternate sitting and walking meditation. In the very traditional Mahāsi, in a very traditional Mahāsi retreat, and I don't know if anybody's actually teaching that in the West these days, but when I started, what is it now, more than 40 years ago, when I did my first retreat, it was in very traditional Mahāsi Method style. It was extremely difficult and rigorous. The schedule was 20 hours a day of meditation. You got 4 hours of sleep, and you alternated walking and sitting. And mealtime wasn't a break. Mealtime was part of the practice. You had the practice while eating is to eat very slowly, and to take note of all the motions of the body and the sensations of smell and touch and taste. And continue with the noting while you eat. So and the idea here was one of Mahāsi's sayings is, if you're trying to make a fire by rubbing two sticks together, you'll never get a spark if you take a break every time you're getting tired. So the idea was to have a continuity of practice, to not have any break in the practice of insight for the period of duration of the retreat. And there is some value to that. There's certainly a value to be had in a continuity of practice. So a somewhat more gentle version would be to try and now this is, in a case where you've got time, you're on a retreat or a self-retreat, you've got all day. Try to work in blocks of time where you start with a walk, then sit, then a walk, then a sit. Now, I recommend starting with the walking and then going into the sit. That seems to be the most beneficial. And it's very important that the transition from walking to sitting be done as mindfully and smoothly, slowly, and carefully as possible. So there's no break. The meditation continues just into a new posture. So that's a basic overview of the Mahāsi method of meditation, Vipassana. One kind of additional theoretical point I think I'll end on is something brought up by Mahāsi in his writing. If you read it, he's talking about the degree of attention given to the object. He says it is a momentary access concentration. This is a phrase taken from the Visuddhimagga. It's a commentarial phrase that is sometimes translated as neighborhood consciousness. It's a mind that's not quite in jhana, but is almost in jhana. So it's a very high degree of samadhi. But it's, in this case, in the case of the insight practice, it's a momentary state of mind. You're not maintaining that level of concentration on a single object. Even when you're on the belly, just watching the belly, that's not a single object. When you look at it properly, it's a very complex motion of muscles and sensations and so on. But in each moment, each single moment, there's an object, and that object should be penetrated or known with the same intensity as if you were almost in jhana. So that covers the first two sections of Mahāsi's book, and then we get into the stages, the particular stages. Next week we'll begin. I don't know how many I'll deal with in a day. I guess it'll vary depending on the complexity of the topic. But that's, I think that'll be sufficient for today, and I'll see what we got for questions on the chat. It looks like the chat's fairly busy. Let's see what we've got here. Another way to gain insight is immediately after exiting the higher jhana, entering Vipassana, for example, exiting either perception or non-perception, and one immediately meditates on impermanence, at least the insight of the unspeakable. The biggest issue in our world is that people think that a being will become extinguished, but in fact it's a conditional process that will become extinguished with the falling away of the same conditioned aspects that made the process. Okay, that's a commentary. It's not really in the form of a question. I don't really see anything. Um, I don't really see anything to disagree with there. It sounds it's kind of sound. One kind of nitpicky point. Um, Mahāsi Sayādaw himself says that mentions that this as one way of practice, and then contrasts his own bare insight to this path of going into jhana and then exiting jhana and retroactively taking the emergence of jhana as an object of insight. But he specifically says that this is Mahāsi's statement. He specifically says that this only really applies to the jhanas up to the base of nothingness. It doesn't apply to neither perception or non-perception. And he doesn't explain it, but I think I know what he means. That there isn't really with any previous jhana, emerging from jhana, you can retroactively perceive it as an object, but there's nothing to perceive as an object in either perception or non-perception. Okay, next question. Since the last talk, I've been trying to apply this technique after attaining access concentration by switching focus to rising and falling at the belly. This pushes me into jhana, though. Is that expected? No, it's not. And if you're going into jhana, you're not really doing this this method properly. The attention to the breath at the belly, the attention should be on the whole movement. So there is another method that's actually very suitable for jhana work of meditating on the belly, where you pay attention to a single point. That's the traditional point. This is used in Zen a lot. The traditional point is can be found mentally. It's sort of obvious. It's a little bit below the navel, and you put your mind on that point and be aware of sensation there. But with the Mahāsi method, you're not doing that. You're being aware of the whole complex movement of the belly, and there's a lot going on. You can feel all kinds of sensations there, so the mind doesn't become as focused. It doesn't go into jhana. How have the various methods of meditation evolved over time? I thought the Satipatthana Sutta provided instructions for meditation. Don't all teachers follow that? Yeah, that's actually a very good question about the historical basis here. I would say that most teachers would say they're following the Satipatthana Sutta, but they'll teach entirely different techniques or methods. Because if you look at the Satipatthana Sutta, it's pretty concise. It doesn't go into detail. So it's open to a lot of interpretation and different readings and commentaries on it. And there isn't really one fixed method. My idea or theory about the Satipatthana Sutta is that it's not a record of a verbatim talk by the Buddha, but is somebody's lecture notes. The Buddha probably giving a series of instructions on meditation during a retreat over a long period of time, weeks or months. And all we have in the Satipatthana Sutta are kind of like the chapter headings. So the detailed techniques are worked out later in time. And as I covered last time, the Burmese Vipassana methods, uh, as we know them today, as we have them, they probably only date to the 18th or early 19th centuries. As a person was free all day with nothing to do, should I just go all in with practice until stream entry, or should I pace myself an hour to a day because stream entry might never happen? Well, I mean that's up to you. How much diligence and devotion do you have to the practice? You say stream entry might never happen, or you don't. You say stream entry might never happen, or you don't know. You can't know that whether it'll happen in this lifetime or not until you try. And even if you don't make it this lifetime, you're setting conditions for your subsequent lifetimes. So it's not time wasted. I think you could benefit from a period of time where you just devote yourself to the practice if you've got the freedom to do that. If an arahant is put under anesthesia, does the cessation of consciousness put them in samadhi of nibbana, or do they experience the same kind of unconsciousness as everyone else? I really don't know. That's highly speculative and theoretical. I mean, you'd have to talk to an arahant who's been under anesthetic to know an answer to that. Venerable Ajahn, from my experience, a mendicant who has ended the defilement should strive to continue practice for the ultimate test, which is death, by strengthening the realization of the unspeakable, doing so not by attaching to delights and the pleasure or repulse from painful, with knowledge and insight which is gained through clear equanimity of the beginning, ending, and drawback and escape of feelings, and the final cessation of death will attain the complete end of conditionality and the process of rebirth. Yes, yeah, that's well said. Next question, we can never know the object itself, only conscious experience. Does an arahant directly know nibbana or just the conscious experience of nibbana? I would really caution you to refrain from trying to speculate about the mind states of an arahant. I mean, we cannot, anything we say about it is going to be wrong. The experience of nibbana is, by definition, indescribable. It's ineffable. So these kind of intellectual definitions and attempts to find some kind of box to put it in, it's not going to work. You can't approach it that way. How do we see the ancient teachings of Buddha connecting with modern people today in their busy lives? Well, there's so much useful in the Buddhist teaching for dealing with our ordinary life, developing the Brahma Viharas, developing mindfulness, learning to be calm, and periods of meditation. Periods of meditation really strengthen that, and give you a basis from which to work in your daily life. The people in the Buddha's time, I mean, the society and the culture and technology, everything was very different, but people are the same. We still have the same defilements and the same possibility of enlightenment. Things haven't changed as much as you might tend to think. Okay, I kind of lost the thread of the chat here, kind of jumping around on me. Okay, here we are. In Sarvastivada, there are 5 ultimate realities rather than 4 like in Theravada. It includes factors disassociated from thought. Can you explain what this is? I'll be frank, I don't know. I don't know what I don't recall. I did study some of the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, but I don't remember that particular point, if I ever did read that. Is Nama from Namarupa the same as Chittasaka from Abhidhamma? No, Chittasaka. I think that's a misspelling for Chittasaka. Yeah, it would be pretty much equivalent. In the Namarupa, as it occurs in dependent origination, is generally taken to refer to the Nama part refers to the three mental aggregates other than vijnana or consciousness. So that would be sankharas, perception, and feeling. And yeah, that corresponds to Chittasaka. It's a pretty complete overlap. Ajahn, to what extent should one be rigid and strict with meditation technique without falling into ignorant mechanical practice? I'm referring to any meditation technique. It's just a general question about meditation. Yeah, that is actually a very good question to bring up, and it's a subtle point. There are, I think this is another case where you strive for a middle path. One extreme would be to be completely loose and free form and not disciplined at all. The other extreme would be to rigorously mechanically adhere to a fixed technique. I think a general advice would be, early on, establishing a practice, you're better to lean towards rigor and follow a technique rigorously, not deviating. But as you mature in the practice, you can find your own way more and more. And if I would also say that rigorously adhering to a technique can become like a form of silabata paramasa, right and ritual clinging. And it can actually prevent the mind from making that leap in the end. The Buddha gives us simile of the raft, and I think that's a very important one to contemplate. The traveler comes across, he comes to a river, and to cross the river, he builds a raft out of bamboo and lashes it together and paddles across the river. And when he gets to the other side of the river, he would be foolish to try and climb up onto the bank, dragging the raft with him. The raft has done its job, he can let it go. I think a subtle point in that metaphor that people sometimes miss is that he would also be foolish if he's in the middle of the stream to start tearing the raft apart. The raft is very important to get him to the other side. So that's a good question, and it's something to work with. Another question. I think I'm applying the same focus at the nostrils to the belly, just changing the location, but not the object. I think I need to make an effort to change the object. Yes. Oh, you're following in from the question about going into jhana. Yeah. It's an entirely different feeling when you're being aware of the whole motion, because it's a much more complex object. It's still a peaceful object. It's not agitating to the mind, but it's too complex to really go into jhana. Is there any reason to live the household life if you don't want to have kids or family or whatnot? Well, short answer would be no. If you don't want to have a family and a wife and kids, why would you want to live the household life? That's the definition of a household life. Is it accurate to say one's progress on the path can be measured by accessing the development of one's equanimity? At least initially, what are some milestones on the path? That is a pretty good one. You should, just in general in your life, and your dealings with the world. You should become more equanimous with time, more even tempered, less reactive. That shows you're developing in the path. That is a good kind of a milestone or a touchstone, a measuring stick. We are consciously aware of painful and pleasant feelings. Why are they not included in vijnana, since they're directly experienced, like vision, sound, taste, etc.? Well, there is a distinction between bodily feeling and mental feeling that's made in the Abhidhamma. They're all classes Vedana, but the mental feelings are quite easily seen to be objects of vijnana. The physical feelings, they're also objects of vijnana. They're not vijnana themselves, they're objects of vijnana, but they're experienced through bodily sensation, so it's a different sense base. The sense bases are the five physical senses and the mind sense. And it's only the sense of touch that experiences pleasure and pain directly. The other four physical senses experience pleasure and pain only as mediated through the mind. Okay, I think I'll getting close to wrapping up here. Let's just see if maybe take a couple more. Somebody said, to be fair, scrupulosity is a problem in all religions. Yes. Ajahn, I've only ever practiced, I think they'll take this last question. I've only ever practiced Goenka method, which I have off and on since 2006. Should I sample the Mahāsi Method too, then settle on one? Yeah, it couldn't hurt to if you have some experience of both, then you can try and see which one works best for you. It's not going to be one size fits all. Now, some people really take to this Mahāsi method. That was my original practice, and I've always liked it. I've always found it very powerful. But I know a lot of people really benefited from Goenka method, which is quite different. It's quite a different technique. So you can only really know how it's going to work for you by trying it. Give it a good try and see. Okay, I'll leave it there, and we'll go on next week to continue with this series. And I would suggest people to have a look at that book. I think it'd be helpful to follow along. And we'll see you later.